Good afternoon and welcome back to Real Property Tax Advisors Summer Series blog, Property Tax 2021. My name is Ann Sheehan and I've been your host for quite some time now. I'm talking about property taxes in 2021 because it's time to prepare. We've had some challenging events in 2020. And 2021 will be our first opportunity to address the impact of the pandemic on our fair market values of our properties from a property tax perspective. So today I want to talk about the retail sector. Retail, and it seems like it was so long ago, but about 9 months ago, when 2020 started, retail was already limping into 2020. They were already undergoing significant changes, probably since 2017, 18. And the reason behind this limp at the beginning of the year is it came down to two things. Primarily, it's e-commerce and the consumer's preference to order it, have it delivered for free, get exactly what you want. If you don't like it or it doesn't fit, you send it back, free shipping, and you get another one. And you can do this at 1 o'clock in the morning. Well, I can't, but some people can. But it's the ease and the convenience, and you have your record keeping right there. It's become a preferred way to shop. And I'm not talking just about Amazon, but it's also, you have other stores. You have Target, grocery stores are even in the click, order, deliver business. So before the pandemic ever hit, we as consumers had already changed the way we wanted to shop. And that was through e-commerce. It was not driving to the store, parking in a parking deck, walking into a mall, walking however far in to get to where you wanted to go. All of a sudden it was such a short process and so daggone inconvenient. That started 3 years ago for retail, and it certainly had not been solved by the beginning of 2020. So add to that, in mid-March, a pandemic. We had a pandemic, and the first thing that happened was shelter-in-place orders. Our governments ordered us to go home and stay home. And don't come out unless it's an absolute necessity or you're a necessary business or employee. But the problem for retail, they could go home and shelter in place. That was fine. The problem for retail was there was no work from home. Everything about retail, until we've gotten further into 2020, has been about the experience. It's been walking into a store, looking at your selection, looking at your choices, and experiencing the entire shopping process from start to beginning. We don't have that anymore, and you can't do that work from home. So they're forced to close to comply with shelter-in-place orders. There's no work from home for retail employees. Yet the companies, the retailers, still had brick and mortar spaces in whether they were malls or strip centers or wherever they were located. They still had storefronts and they still had rent to pay and they still had expenses to cover, but they had zero revenue. Especially if they had no e-commerce platform, it was really zero. They were getting nothing. So retail, out of all the industry types, was hit the hardest and really had no options except to either reinforce an already well-built e-commerce platform or to quickly build an e-commerce platform and get it in place so you can grab your part of the revenue that's available. The first industries to, retail was one of the first industries to be hit by bankruptcies. I mean, we've had a lot of bankruptcies this year in 2020, but if you think about it, it all started with retail probably back in 18 and 19 and 20. We saw almost the majority of the bankruptcies were retailers. And again, as I said, it's this whole e-commerce preference for shopping. But in 2020 alone, the pandemic pushed JCPenney over the edge, Steinmart, Pier 1 Imports, Neiman Marcus, a whole slew of well-known retail. Joseph Bank, how long have they been in business? Pushed, stayed, known, favored brands into bankruptcy. Retail is still 9 months into the year, and 9 months after the pandemic was announced, we're still in flux. We have no idea how retail is going to get through this. So what's the outlook for retail? There's a state of uncertainty for retailers to continue operating as retailers for literally the foreseeable future. There's a prediction I saw somewhere that over 25,000 retails will simply close their doors for good. They're just going to walk out and lock it up. Now, there is a little bit of a bright side, I think, for larger retails, whether it's a mall, which of course is a collection of smaller retailers, or a big box store, which is, a single occupier. I think some of these retailers with big spaces have an opportunity to take that basic real estate, which is a large building, lots of wide open spaces. They already have dock doors, around the building, and they have lots of parking. So what we're starting to see happen is, people are starting to think and adapt. And so a lot of these former malls have been sold to the Amazons and other e-commerce vendors of the world as fulfillment space for pick and pack. So, the ceiling heights are tall enough. You can't do a big distribution center for the most part, but you can pick and pack. So when you're sitting in there ordering a new pair of headphones, maybe it's being picked off the shelf in a former mall, packed and out the door. It also works for last mile delivery. So, a lot of these companies have big industrial distribution centers, that are strategically placed throughout the country. And then that last mile from the big industrial warehouse to your door, or to close to your door, the last stop before your door, that's the last mile. So the big distribution center gets it to a smaller center, which could easily be a former retail space, and get it to your door. It's quicker. It allows for the same-day delivery model that has become so popular with us. Not only do we want the convenience of clicking, we want it now. So that's been a very positive turn for retailers. But the one thing too is property taxes. So retailers typically have a base rent with a percentage. So a percentage of everything that they sell would be paid as additional rent to the landlord. So when you start getting into an adaptive reuse, and every bit of that rent, whether it was the base rent or the whatever I just said, the percentage rent, all of that is rent. So when we would do a property tax appeal for a retail owner, all of that was rent, and all of that went in. All expenses were deducted, and then you calculate your NOI and cap it. Well, with this proposed adaptive reuse that we're starting to see, and it's not for all retail spaces, but it certainly is for some, keep in mind that adaptive reuse, whether it's a pick and pack or last mile delivery, that's a much lower priced building, which means it's going to have a much lower tax assessment because it's no longer retail. They're no longer any percentage rents. It's just rent. And rent for basically a warehouse function is a whole lot less than a retail rent with percentage. So a couple of things you might want to think about is if you are going in to acquire one of these former retail sites for an adaptive reuse project, it's probably worth your time to have a property tax acquisition study done to help underwrite your pro forma, because I guarantee you the value is going to be less than it was under the retail use. And so, you know, everybody's skittish enough right now with lending and everything else. So let's add credibility to your pro forma by at least getting a really good property tax liability estimate into your underwriting package. For those of retailers who will still be retailers, appeals need to be filed. You know, your retail owners, whether you own a mall, multiple tenants, or you have a single owner-occupied retail space, you need to appeal because the pandemic has hit everybody. I think I've said this a million times. Nobody's been exempt. It's been very inclusive. It's even been inclusive of the jurisdictions who are very protective of their assessments and the proposed revenues that the assessments will deliver for, you know, the tax year. But I think the other thing that, like I've told pretty much every other property owner, whether it's investment or owner occupied, you've got to keep track of the additional cost to stay open and keep serving your customers. Companies are spending a significant amount of money because the shopper and the tenant is requiring the owner to provide a safe and well place, starting with the parking lot or the parking deck to the front door, into the store, out into the mall, food service. All of that has to be safe or they're not coming back. They're going to run. And that's the reality of it. So we'll need to file in the basic fundamentals, you know, financials, vacancy, occupancy, rents, et cetera, et cetera. Any accommodations or concessions you've had to make to keep a tenant, whether you've lowered rent, you've added TI to help create this safe space, or given free rent and tacked it on to the end of the lease. The other thing is the appeal needs to include the negative value of the pandemic on the value of your property. So that's over and above doing an income analysis. So you have to do the income analysis, and I would say you have to look at comparable sales too, but there really haven't been any comparable sales since the pandemic started. So that's another whole discussion of valuing during a period of material change, but we're not going to go there today. That's something the appraisers are going to be forced to deal with. And I'm sure we will too as a result. But the fact of the matter remains, the pandemic has hit everybody. Your property has suffered not only just from your financial fundamentals, but it has suffered from this pandemic. And we need to make sure that your assessment reflects an adjustment for that very thing. Okay, that's it on retail. We covered an awful lot in a very short period of time. We could have gone on for days due to the complexity of retail. It's going to be around for a while. It'll probably take us 2021 through maybe 2023, 24 to sort all this out from the pandemic, regardless of the property type. But retail certainly is going to be in the picture for a while. Okay, thank you for joining me today. Our next property type that we will tackle, I think, will be restaurants. We'll tackle restaurants. That's a good one, and it follows pretty well with retail. Thank you for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed this information. And as always, if anybody has questions or comments, please reach out to me directly. And until next time, have a very happy day.